Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to my second video in the Getting Started with Swift tutorial series. Now, in this video we're going to go over variables and constants. So let's get started. Open up Xcode. I have Xcode 6.1. You need Xcode 6 or above to see Playgrounds because it's a new feature. So when you open up Xcode, you click Get Started with Playground, and now you give it a name. So I'm going to name this Vars and Constants. Pick any platform you want. This pretty much determines what libraries you have available in the playground. But since we're just going over basic variables and constants, it doesn't matter which platform you pick, and because both platforms have the same variables, the same constants, and so on. So yeah, vars and constants, platform whatever, and hit next. Now I'm going to save it to my desktop. I'm going to hit create, and I've got it. So now, on the left side, you'll see the code. Obviously, it's got the import statements, example variable, and then on the right side, you'll see a results pane. The results pane shows you the output of a variable that you declared. Well, I guess the value of a variable that you've declared, of the value of a variable that you've just set, or any calculation that you performed on that line. So if you had a for loop, it wouldn't, let's say you had a for loop looping 100 times and printing out a value, it wouldn't print out 100 times. It would actually just tell you it did it 100 times in brackets. And then there's like if you clicked this, these icons help you. You can see a graph of all the values that were in the loop and so on. We're going to go over that later down the line, but just know that that's where you can see all that information, and it's really, really helpful. Now, let's say you have a syntax error or some error in your code. For example, if I took out that quote, you can see it turns gray. It was black before. Let me show you an example. So if I put it back, it's black. If I get rid of that and make an error, it turns gray. So if you ever see gray on the right side, that means there's a problem with your code, and you should check it out. That's a really cool tool. And as you can see, it compiles automatically. For example, if I did Playground 2, I'd have to press anything, it automatically compiles and updated the right side, which is the reason you should use Playground. If you're testing out some code, it's really helpful for you to get feedback from your code really fast. Now, let's get started. So I'm going to declare some variables. Var my var1 equals some string. Var my var2 equals 23. Var my var3 equals true. And then, as you can see, I'm not putting semicolons. There's no semicolon here, or anywhere. But if I did put a semicolon, it wouldn't mess up anything. It would still compile and run perfectly fine. You don't need to put semicolons at the end of a statement. So I just wanted to reiterate that. The convention is not to put semicolons, so I would just get in the habit of not putting semicolons. You can put them if you're used to them, but it's just the language, and Apple suggests don't put semicolons. It's just a thing. So now you can see I declared a string variable. Obviously I put, my var1 equals some string, my var2 equals 23, my var3 equals true. Now if you ignore the right side, if you just look at the declaration of the variables, you can see that there's nowhere that I put this is a string, this is an integer, this is a boolean. So you might be thinking, oh, it's like JavaScript where I can change the value and go, my var1 is now an integer 556, I guess, typo. But as you can see, it gives an error. Type string does not conform to protocol. Integer, literal, convertible. What that means essentially is you can't assign it an integer value because it cannot implicitly convert an integer to a string. Notice how I said convert an integer to a string. It will never make a string variable into an integer variable. It will never change because in Swift, all variables are strongly typed. They are not loosely typed like in JavaScript. In JavaScript, if you took a var my string and that was a string originally and you assign an integer value, that entire variable would become an integer variable. That does not happen in Swift. The only thing you can do is convert from one type to another, and you have to do that explicitly. It will not do that implicitly, and it will throw this error here. We're not going over the methods to do that. We'll do that in later videos, but for now, just know you cannot implicitly convert from one variable type to another variable type. And so yeah, you can't do that. Now, so you might have been confused, right? Like, that's just wanted to go over, you can't. This is a string, and this will always be a string. This will never be anything else but a string. This will always be an integer, and it will never be anything but an integer, and so on and so forth. So let's say you didn't want to give it an initial value, right? So let's say my var initializer. My var initial. Let's say I didn't want to give an integer an initial value, so you would think that I would just leave it like this, right? Wrong. You can't do that because it says type annotation missing in pattern. What that means is Swift wants you to tell it what type this variable is going to be. It's because on declaration it has to decide whether it's integer, string, boolean, float, double, whatever. It has to decide that on the declaration. So you have to tell it what type. And the way you do that is pretty much just say colon and then the type. So I made this an integer. You can make it a float. You can make it a string. You can make it whatever you wanted. I'm gonna make it an integer. Now you don't have to. Now the error is gone and it works fine. Now I can assign the value later on and give it 43, and it works just fine. Now let's say you could also, even with this syntax right here, initial equals 43. Now let's say I did another one, right? var initial 2, and I made it say I made it a string, and then I wanted to give it a value though, hello. See, it works. That works fine too. You can give it a type and then give it a value, but usually when you're giving it a value explicitly like this, like hello or 43 or whatever, it's automatically inferring the type, and it's pretty obvious what this is. It's obviously a string, and this is obviously an integer. This is obviously a boolean. So you don't, in this situation, you probably don't need to put this because it doesn't really help you. It doesn't really help you, and it just adds more code to your application. You don't really need to do that. So you actually get rid of that. But I'm gonna leave it in just to show that you can do that. Now I think I went over pretty much everything there is to go over for variables. Let me just go over some types. You can make it a float, double. A float is a 32-bit floating point value. A double is a 64-bit floating point value. And then we have int, string, boolean. And there's a bunch of other ones like arrays, tuples, and dictionaries and so on. But we're going to go over those in later videos. So that's enough for variables. Let's do constants now. Constants in Swift, you're going to use constants a lot. In other languages, you may have not used constants at all, right? In Objective-C, it was actually, you declared, let's say, a string constant. You do end string star const, your variable name, and then a string value. It's kind of complicated. It's like, where does the star go? Does it go before or after the constant, and so on? And there were all valid ways of doing it. It just might not work in some places if you declared it a certain way. So those are the complicated. People have actually avoided the use of constants a lot, and it was just a hassle using them. In Swift, the language can actually perform some optimizations if you use constants in the right way. For example, let's say you had a function that you called in another function. So you had function 1 calls function 2, right? Function 2. And then function 2 returns a string value, but you're never going to change that string value. You're just going to use it to print out somewhere or do some conditional or whatever. You're never going to print that out, right? So if that returns a value, you want to store it in a constant because you're never changing it after you've gotten that value back, right? So you would do, so you want to put in the constant. That way Swift will do some optimizations and help you speed up your program. Now, I agree it's not really that important because you probably won't make that big of a difference if you have a small application. But once you get into very resource-intensive big applications, you can see the difference. So let's go over that. So the way you declare a constant is similar to the way you declare a variable, except you use the term let. And you do let my const, give your variable name, and then give it a value. So I'm going to give it 43. I don't know why I'm using 43 a lot. So I made this constant integer. Now let's say I want to change the value to 55. As you'd expect, it throws an error. You cannot do that. And everything on the right side goes gray. It's an error. It says cannot assign to let value my constant because pretty much it's a constant. You can't assign it another value. So you can't do that. And you can also, like the syntax we use here for the variable, to give it a type, you can also do that. So you can do, I'm going to make it an integer. And you can't, but again, you cannot leave it alone like that. It worked for an integer like it did here, but it doesn't work for a constant. A constant requires that you give it a value upon declaration. So I declared the constant here, and it needs a value on that line. You cannot set it later. You can set it equal to whatever you wanted. I'm going to give 34, but you can also, if you're, let's say, in your code, you would actually just give it, you set it equal to a function. You could just set it equal to a function that you were calling to get a value back, you know. And then once again, if you're giving an explicit value like this, you don't need the int port. This portion, again, just like I got rid of it. I told you you didn't need this part here because it's obviously a string. This is obviously an integer, so you don't need this part right here. But I'm going to leave it in just so you can do that. You can also just do my const int2 equals 54. Again, they're both the same thing. Now, that's pretty much, I think that's essentially everything that I wanted to go over regarding variables and constants. Just know that you should use constants where you can use them. If you're not changing the value of a variable, so you declared a var type variable, and you're not changing its value after you first set it or first receive its value, then you might want to think about making it a constant, because that will just optimize your program, and it's always good to be in the habit of having optimal code. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative. Please look forward to my next video, and please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.